What occurs when a CEO is denied access to his own organization after conducting a clandestine operation? Harold Kingston had established his financial empire without the aid of a silver spoon or any other conveniences. Simply decades of unwavering dedication to the proper execution of tasks, strategy, and fortitude. Beginning as a college student with a dream and a pocket full of rejection letters, he had pushed through doors that were not intended to be opened for men like him. At present, his name was prominently displayed on the letterhead of one of the nation's most rapidly expanding financial institutions. His decisions had a significant impact on the lives of thousands, including customers, employees, and shareholders. However, recently, he had been disturbed by a persistent nagging feeling. He had consistently taken pride in operating a business that was founded on the principles of integrity. However, in the past few months, he had heard murmurs, complaints that were initially subtle but gradually became more pronounced. Narratives of customers being discreetly pushed away, ignored, or dismissed. It did not set well with him. Harold did not depend on second-hand reports. He never possessed it. In order to comprehend something, he required to observe it firsthand. Subsequently, the strategy gained momentum. There was no prior notification. There is no assistance available. Absence of censors. Him alone. That morning, he entered his wardrobe and disregarded the racks of polished leather shoes, silk ties and designer suits. Instead, he selected a pair of denim and an Old Navy polo, nothing that suggested wealth or influence. His Rolex was perpetually situated on the bedside. He donned a pair of trainers with treads that were slightly worn. He then stood in front of the mirror. Harold Kingston, who was still gazing at him, had been stripped of all visible signs of power. No garment that is custom-made. Absence of an entourage that commands respect. It is merely another individual. An additional client. Perfect. Instead of his customary private chauffeur, he retrieved his phone and requested a cab. There was a brief moment of hesitation as he exited his condominium. He had already made a decision, so there was no doubt. However, he was curious. Is this an unnecessary expenditure of time? Will his personnel meet the standard he has established? Or was he on the brink of verifying his most apprehensive assumptions? The journey through Los Angeles was tranquil. The city was in motion, with businessmen checking their watches, tourists taking photographs, and street vendors preparing for the midday rush. However, Harold was contemplating the possibilities within the carriage. It is possible that the complaints were exaggerated. It is possible that there were only a few isolated incidents. However, it is possible that it was not. His driver arrived at the curb in front of one of his branches, a modern, streamlined space that is situated between an insurance office and a high-end coffee shop. The type of bank that was intended to be both professional and approachable. Harold paid the driver and exited the vehicle. Take a deep inhalation. One step forward, followed by another. He was unprepared for the truth to strike him so quickly when he pushed through those glass doors. The glass entrance was opened by Harold, who entered via it. The air was infused with the aroma of recently printed receipts and the faintest vestiges of cleaning solution. The bank was not overcrowded, rather, there were a few customers dispersed throughout the establishment, some of whom were seated and others were waiting in queue. Posters advertising investment plans, mortgage offers, and financial services were affixed to the walls. He advanced a few steps before pausing. He was not acknowledged by any employee. Initially, he believed that he was hallucinating the event. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with reading spectacles perched on her nose, was busy tapping away at her keyboard as he glanced over. He awaited her to raise her head. A nod. A grin. An individual "Can I help you?" Something. Nothing. A man in a tailored suit entered the room behind him. The receptionist's demeanor abruptly altered. She stood up, smiled, and extended a cordial greeting. "Good morning, sir. What can we do to help you today?" Harold observed the stranger being promptly directed to a teller. He clenched his mandible, but he was able to maintain his composure. It is possible that it was an accident. It is possible that she was simply preoccupied. Consequently, he proceeded to the counter, where a youthful teller was concluding a transaction with a client. He waited for his turn, gazing at the others in queue while his hands were in his pockets. Smiles, bows, and detailed explanations of their transaction were all being directed towards a well-dressed couple at the adjacent window. Afterward, it was his turn. The teller, a woman in her late 20s with perfectly curled hair, scarcely glanced at him. "What is it that you require?" Her voice was monotonous. Uninterested. Harold greeted her with a courteous greeting. "I am interested in establishing a new high-value account." She exhaled. Heaved. It was as though he had just requested that she perform an insufferable task. She stated, "You must schedule an appointment for that." Harold shook his head. "Prior to my arrival, I reviewed your website. It stated that walk-ins are permitted for new accounts." She scarcely raised her head. "Well, not for those types of accounts." He briefly observed an additional consumer at the adjacent counter, who was also dressed in business attire. The teller was patiently guiding him through the account options, providing him with pamphlets and offering him coffee. Harold returned to his teller. "So, just to be clear, if I were to appear or dress differently, would you be treating me differently at this moment?" Her expression tightened as she blank. "That is not the statement I made." Harold inclined his head. "However, it is precisely what you are undertaking." It was evident that she was irritated as she exhaled abruptly. "Look, sir, perhaps another branch would be a more suitable option for your requirements." He continued to investigate the extent of this phenomenon, as his fingertips curled into his palms. Harold could sense the heat rising in his bosom, but he was not present to deliver a devastating blow. He was present to observe and comprehend. Consequently, he exhaled and continued to participate. "No problem," he replied, maintaining his composure. "Perhaps I require additional information up front. Could you provide me with information regarding your business account options?" The teller exhaled once more as he observed the queue that was forming behind him. She reached under the counter, extracted a crumpled brochure, and slid it across the desk without uttering a word. There is no explanation. There was no offer to provide him with a comprehensive explanation. Harold retrieved the paper and perused it. He was already familiar with each and every word that was inscribed on it. However, this was not the primary concern. Another customer, an older man in a blazer, approached a different teller across the room and posed the same query. The response? Optimistic. "Greetings." The teller leaned forward, elucidated the advantages of various account types, and even cracked it just to lighten the atmosphere. Harold examined the brochure in his hand, which was creased. "Is there an individual with whom I can consult regarding account recommendations?" he inquired. The teller's lips were pressed together in a narrow line. "That individual would be the branch manager, however." "That is fantastic. I would appreciate the opportunity to converse with them." She hesitated. Then, with the faintest grin, she stated, "He is preoccupied." Harold's eyebrows were elevated. "Did you verify?" "He is perpetually engaged." A moment of silence. She then turned to the next person in queue, effectively dismissing him, without saying a word. Harold briefly retreated. He remained motionless. It was not merely poor service. This was done with deliberate intent. He watched the manner in which other customers were treated as he peered around the bank. Courtesy, efficiency, and forbearance were extended to those who appeared to belong. Then, there was him, unnoticed, unwelcome, and inconsequential. However, he was not planning to depart. Not yet. Because it was now time to assert himself. Harold was not the type of individual who required to elevate his voice in order to garner attention. An empire had been established solely by his presence. However, at this time, his typical image has been removed. He was witnessing a reality that he was unable to disregard. He passed the teller without speaking and proceeded to the glass-paneled office at the rear of the branch. Harold could observe a man in a tailored gray suit, drinking coffee, and scrolling through his phone, as the manager's door was slightly ajar. Preoccupied. The frame was gently knocked by Harold. The manager scarcely raised his head. "Can I help you?" "Yes. I was told I need an appointment to open a high-value account, but I just watched 2 other customers get full service with no issues." The manager finally raised his head. Harold's basic attire, the worn trainers and the absence of designer labels, caused his eyes to dart. He adopted a courteous yet assertive demeanor, a smile that conveyed, "I would prefer not to engage with you at this time. Sir, if you'd like to apply for an account, I suggest you try one of our other branches," he indicated without hesitation. Harold exhaled gradually. "Why would I need to go to another branch when I'm already at one of my own?" The manager maintained an expression that was scarcely altered. "It is merely a matter of," he paused, his brows furrowing. "Wait. Your own?" Harold extracted his executive ID from his pocket. He placed it on the manager's desk with a subdued authority that required no explanation. The space appeared to contract. The manager's gaze briefly shifted from the ID to Harold's visage, and then back to the ID. He swallowed forcefully, causing his larynx to vibrate. "Mr. Kingston, I didn't realize," Harold inclined his head. "Didn't realize what?" The pale-faced teller who had dismissed him earlier peered around the corner. The receptionist, who had scarcely acknowledged him, suddenly appeared to be very interested in her keyboard. The silence was prolonged. Harold permitted it. He then spoke, his voice sounding placid yet sharp enough to penetrate the tension. "You didn't realize I was someone who mattered." The manager opened his mouth, but no words were uttered. Harold's gaze was unwavering as he leaned in slightly. "Tell me, if I hadn't revealed who I was, how would this have ended? Would you have called security? Escorted me out? Let me walk away thinking I wasn't good enough for my own institution?" The manager struggled to speak. "Of course not, sir." Harold adjusted his posture. "But you already did." The weight of his words settled in the air like a tempest that was about to break. At this moment, each member of that branch was anticipating his subsequent actions. Harold stood there, allowing the gravity of the situation to settle in. Discomfort was pervasive in the space. No one ventured to speak, as if they were hoping that this situation would somehow resolve itself. However, it would not. Not at this time. Harold observed a momentary glimmer of panic beneath the manager's expression, which was still frozen in astonishment. The teller who had dismissed him earlier stood near the counter, her arms crossed securely over her chest, avoiding eye contact. Harold retrieved his executive ID and reinserted it into his pocket. Then, in the same composed, unwavering tone, he inquired, "How many other customers have you turned away like this?" Silence. The room was examined by his gaze. "How many people have walked in here needing assistance and were made to feel small? Dismissed? Told to take their business elsewhere?" The manager's voice was scarcely audible as he cleared his throat. "Sir, I assure you, that's not how we operate." Harold's laughter was brief and devoid of humor. "I just watched it happen to me." He glanced at the personnel and shook his head. "And if this is what happens when I'm standing in front of you, I don't want to imagine how my customers are treated when no one's watching." The security officer had approached in response to the energy shift. However, Harold was not a man who required force to communicate his message. Instead, he reached for his phone. Tap. Then another. The manager's body stiffened as Harold perused his contacts and initiated a call. "Good morning, Mrs. Holloway," he greeted his executive assistant upon receiving the call. "I need an internal audit launched at the Los Angeles branch. Today." The manager was pallid. "Yes, today," Harold reconfirmed. "And while you're at it, have HR pull every customer complaint filed here in the past 6 months. I want names. I want details." The employees shifted uncomfortably as the reality of the situation dawned on them. Harold terminated the conversation and reinserted his phone into his pocket. Then, he gazed at the manager. "You have 1 hour to gather your staff in the conference room. We're going to have a conversation about what kind of bank this is, and, more importantly, what kind of bank it will be moving forward." The manager hesitated before he stiffly nodded. Harold was aware of the receptionist's final gaze upon him. The manner in which the teller exhaled abruptly, as if she were acutely aware of the extent of the harm she had inflicted in a single instant of bias. All right. Because change was imminent, and this time, no one was attempting to conceal it. An hour later, the conference room was filled with a palpable sense of disquiet as the Los Angeles branch employees sat rigidly. Harold Kingston sat at the head of the long table, his palms resting on the polished wood. He was not present to shout. He was not present to terminate individuals immediately. However, he was present to ensure that they comprehended the impact of the recent events. Before speaking, he allowed the silence to persist. He stated, "I established this organization from scratch." His voice was composed and steady. "I did not construct it because I was granted an opportunity or because doors were left open for me. Rather, I did so because I had to fight for it. I am aware of the experience of being disregarded, and made to feel as though one does not belong. And the fact that it is occurring within my own bank." He shook his head. "I will not tolerate it." The manager cleared his throat, but he prudently chose to remain silent. Some of the staff avoided his gaze. Harold persisted. "Today, I entered this branch as an ordinary customer. I refrained from circulating my name. Special treatment was not anticipated by me. Nevertheless, I did anticipate, as any customer should, that fundamental respect would be observed." He paused, allowing his words to fully penetrate his mind. "Instead, I received justifications. Dismissiveness. Obstacles that were erected solely because someone determined that I was not worth their time." The teller who had declined to assist him shifted awkwardly in her seat. Harold directed his gaze towards her. "Could you provide an explanation for your assumption that I was not present for legitimate business?" She opened her mouth, then closed it, as her visage was engulfed in a fiery red hue. Harold did not respond to her. She began, I just thought. But her words dissolved into oblivion. Harold nodded once. That is the issue, is it not? The room was eerily silent. His focus shifted as he exhaled. I do not operate my business based on the appearance of individuals. I operate it on the basis of trust. In service. Regarding the assurance that individuals entering those doors experience a sense of value rather than judgment. If you can't provide that, you don't belong here. A prolonged period of silence. Then he proceeded. Now, the following is going to occur. Each of you is currently undergoing new training in customer relations. This training will not be a brief seminar that you attend and then return to business as usual. It will be authentic. It is going to cause you discomfort. Because that is the sensation of change. The manager cleared his throat. Sir, Harold seamlessly interjected, you will be the first to participate in that training, as leadership commences at the highest echelons. The superintendent ceased to speak. Harold adjusted his posture. This is not a matter of punishment. It pertains to accountability. Individuals are entitled to superior treatment. And that is precisely what they will receive from now on. He scanned the room, observing each expression of anxiety, remorse, and introspection. Subsequently, he retrieved his phone and dispatched a final email to each branch. A statement. A pledge. A cautionary tale. Because from this point forward, no one would enter one of his institutions and feel as though they were not welcome. Not under his supervision. Certain teachings are particularly impactful. However, which are the most challenging? Those are the ones that have the power to transform everything. What actions would you have taken in Harold's place? Please share your thoughts in the comments section below. Also, if you are of the opinion that respect should never be a privilege but rather a standard, please click the subscribe icon. Due to narratives such as this, it is imperative that they are heard.